From ZTN Studios in Harare, Zimbabwe, welcome to the National Purse. Our discussion today, safeguarding COVID-19 resources. This broadcast is brought to you by Zim Papers TV Network, ZTN, and our partners, the Zimbabwe Coalition on Debt and Development, ZIMCOD. Hello, I'm Andy Hodges. Now, in disaster contexts, resources are more often abused, as some legal frameworks tend to be relaxed to allow nations to respond rapidly to the ensuing emergencies. The challenge is not about the relaxation of policies, but it's about ensuring that public funds are expended transparently, prudently, economically and effectively, and that financial management be responsible while fiscal reporting remains clear. In response to COVID-19, the Zimbabwean government has issued several press statements and circulars on the mobilization and allocation of COVID-19 resources. There are reports, however, that some of the resources earmarked for addressing the crisis are being abused. In a recent development, the Ministry of Finance and Economic Development has raised alarm after it emerged that officials were looting funds meant for COVID-19 relief. Permanent Secretary in the Ministry of Finance, George Guvamatanga, wrote to accounting officers advising them that only sanctioned travel should be allowed to draw domestic allowances, while the rest should go to deserving people in the country. In a circular dated the 28th of April 2020, the Permanent Secretary Guvamatanga noted that instead of government departments focusing on coronavirus interventions, they were now pushing more for allowances than delivering it to the needy. It is unfortunate that reportedly top government workers were taking the biggest part of funds allocated to the coronavirus response in the form of travel and subsistence allowances, while frontline health workers go without risk allowances or personal protective equipment. Look, in a related story, Chitengwiza Council nurses have downed tools, citing poor working conditions, among them salary arrears and lack of personal protective equipment or PPE. It is ironic that the workers went on strike, as the workers in Zimbabwe joined the rest of the world in commemorating International Workers' Day. Another example is that of Musami Mission Hospital in Murewa, which has been designated as an isolation and testing center in Mashonaland East Province. It is operating without infrared thermometers for use on COVID-19 suspected patients, jeopardizing efforts at curbing the spread of COVID-19. It is against this background that this week's National Purse discussion will focus on safeguarding of COVID-19 resources. Now, joining us on the National Purse today, we're joined in the studio by Janet Zhou, ZIMCOD Executive Director, and Barbara Maiwasha, University of Zimbabwe, Department of Political and Administrative Studies. And later on in the show, we'll be talking to Joy Mbenje from Action Aid Zimbabwe, and the Honourable Tendai Biti, Member of Parliament for Harare East and the Chairperson of the Public Accounts Committee in the Parliament of Zimbabwe. Okay, brilliant. Joy Mbenje, of course, from Action Aid Zimbabwe will be joining us. So anyway, ladies, welcome to the National Purse.
Thank you very much, Andy.
Now, if you have any comments or views on our show today, please contact us via our Facebook page, Zim Papers TV Network, or via our Twitter handle at ZTN News. Now, Janet, this week the government announced a stimulus package of 18 billion Zimbabwe dollars. And the stimulus package and rescue package constitutes 9% of Zimbabwe's GDP. Yeah. Now, considering that the Ministry of Finance and Economic Development has already raised a red flag concerning the handling of COVID-19 resources, do you think there are adequate constitutional and legal frameworks for safeguarding public resources in Zimbabwe? And if so, how effective are they?
Thank you very much, Andy. I think this program is really coming at that opportune time, because we have been raising this issue. I think if there are any lessons that we have to learn from many countries that have responded to COVID-19, it was an issue of exercising greater transparency in the use of public resources. So greater transparency will go beyond just publishing what has been received, but also how it has been used. Because then we have these kind of issues where then public officials and high officials are requesting for allowances, travel allowances, at the expense of actually reaching the needy and those that are most affected.
Yes, right. Yeah. I mean, you're right, Janet. In fact, we've had these stimulus packages before, and they've disappeared, some of them, have they
Yes,
not?
exactly. But in terms of the legal and institutional frameworks, I think Zimbabwe is rich in that regard. Our issue is not an issue of crisis and policy or legal frameworks, but on implementation. So I would say what we have in the Constitution is very elaborate in terms of public finance management and oversight role of Parliament. It is very clear clear in terms of the Auditor General, withdrawals from the Consolidated Revenue Fund, for example. We have the Public Finance Management Act, the Debt Act, so many acts. I think we are rich in terms of the legal frameworks and the Constitution, the supreme law. But our issue and our major weakness has been on implementation, which is then makes the whole system porous. So the effectiveness is then hampered by the porousness of
our next guest on the National Purse, in fact, should be able to give us more insights into what Janet is talking about, because joining us now in the National Purse Safeguarding COVID-19 Resources is Honourable Tendai Biti, who served as Zimbabwe's Minister of Finance from 2009 to 2013. He is the current Member of Parliament for Harare East and Chairperson of Parliament's Public Accounts Committee. Tendai, welcome to the National Purse. Hello, Tendai, can you hear me? All right, I think while we get him back on the line, let me move to the next question. Barbara, you heard what Janet was saying, but I think the issue, of course, is that there seem to be already signs of abuse with COVID-19 funds. I mean, we heard what the Ministry of Finance and Economic Planning said. So I suppose the question is what measures can we put in place to plug it? Because it appears as if we wait for the horse to bolt the barn, so to speak, before we find something, rather than putting in place measures up front that stops such sort of abuse.
Thank you very much, Andy. I think at this point, the key issue is on emphasizing transparency and accountability in terms of all fiscal decisions. We are saying that the government and responsible public officials should ensure that they account for the way that they will be using resources. They should make sure that they are streamlined mechanism whereby people can get to know how funds are being mobilized and how expenditure is being managed in line with the COVID-19.
Barbara, hold your thought. We've managed to get hold of Honourable Biti on the phone, but please hold your thoughts. I'd like to come back to you when we come back after he's finished. So as I said, we're now joined by Honourable Tendai Biti, who served as Zimbabwe's Minister of Finance from 2009 to 2013. He's the current Member of Parliament for Harare East and Chairperson of the Parliament's Public Accounts Committee. Tendai, welcome to the National Purse.
Hello, Andy, and good morning to your listeners and viewers.
Well, so now, the government has recently announced a stimulus package of 18 billion Zimbabwe dollars to help counter the effects of COVID-19 on the Zimbabwean economy. Do you think there are adequate constitutional and legal frameworks for safeguarding public resources in Zimbabwe? And how effective are they? And also, how will Parliament ensure that, in particular, the COVID-19 stimulus package is not abused?
Yeah, first things first, Andy. Any allocation of resources can only be done by Parliament. Parliament is the controller, the gatekeeper of the Consolidated Revenue Fund. So the first mistake that Mutuli makes, and his middle name should be Mutuli Mistake Mule, is that he has not gone to Parliament. Parliament said yesterday, but they didn't bring the supplementary budget for $18 billion. Instead, they chose to do other things like firing MPs. So they can't have a package not approved by Parliament. Second, that's the first problem. Parliament has not approved this. And the reason why Parliament must approve is that Parliament must scrutinize everything that they've demanded there to see whether it's authentic. So just to give you one example, we are harvesting now. It's harvesting season right now. So why would you give $6 billion to agriculture when we are harvesting, instead of giving $6 billion to COVID, and you give just $1 billion to COVID? There's no money for safety nets. So these are crazy things. These are ridiculous things. But this is the reason why Parliament, as the gatekeeper, should scrutinize that supplementary budget, because it's not coming from the original 2020 budget. Even if it was coming, there's now verimenting. They're now taking money, but they haven't said that. They're now taking money from defense or health to go to the $18 billion. But you and I know that they're not doing that. You and I know that this is a supplementary, a separate budget. Therefore, Parliament must approve. So that's mistake number one. Mistake number two is something that everyone knows. The government doesn't have money. The government is broke. And if you have got any doubt about that, I refer you to the letter by Minister Mutuli Ngube, the embarrassing letter of the 2nd of April 2020 to the IFIs. where he was begging as little as US $200 million for COVID, and then of course debt cancellation. I also refer you to the humanitarian appeal that has been made by the government through Mr. Mnangagwa in the sum of $2.2 billion US dollars. So the government doesn't have money. So a lot of this $18 billion, it's not there. It's just hot air. But having said that, it's so important for Zimbabwe to mitigate risks. We know, and I know from the work I've done in the Public Accounts Committee, is that wherever there is money or the threat of money, the cartels will come on board. The eaters will come on board. You know, the greed eaters will come on board. So if you look at what is happening now, the entire value chain of our COVID response right now has now been surrounded by these leopards and hyenas that are willing to grab every dollar. I just bought yesterday for my law firm, temperature, thermometers, masks, testing equipment, $40 US. Everything I bought is Chinese, and I have no doubt in my mind, and I have no evidence, but I have no doubt in my mind that I bought things that Jack Ma donated into this country. Where are Jack Ma's donations? So the long and short of what I'm saying is that we need to mitigate the risks, because Zimbabwe, by its very nature, is corrupt, and the levels of corruption since November 2017 have been heightened. So the police need to play their role. The parliament needs to play its role. The ICU department, the oversight department in the Ministry of Finance, needs to play its role, but that won't work. That won't work, and we will have to wait for Mrs. Chiri, the Auditor General, to expose the looting. So my proposal is that immediately after this lockdown, and immediately after we can say we've flattened our curve, there must be a forensic audit called for by Parliament into every cent, into every glove, into every mask that we have expended through the lockdown process. Without that, people will steal. Without that, people will get away with it.
Right.
It is the threat of the existence of a forensic audit will mitigate the risk.
All right,
we
now,
need to mitigate the risk.
Now, Tendai, you talked about Parliament and the oversight. I mean, you were there yesterday. I assume that you probably asked a question about this to find out what's happening with the executive. I think that's my first question. But secondly as well, we talked about this earlier with the guest in the studio about how we seem to take action after the money has been abused or after the money is spent. Is there any measures that can be put in place prior to the money being allocated out that we can take, particularly as Parliament, to make sure that doesn't happen?
Yes, let's follow the law. Let's just follow the law. So right now they're talking of $18 billion, but Parliament has not been involved. If Parliament is involved, it would put some oversight. It would discuss the authenticity of the claims. Permanent secretaries would have to go and justify their amounts. And also Parliament would have insisted that the monies are not going into ministries' bank accounts. The monies are going to suppliers of goods. And who are the suppliers? The suppliers are overseas, people. We don't manufacture ventilators in Zimbabwe, for a start. We don't manufacture a lot of the things. So Parliament should be consulted prior. That's what the law says.
Right.
But they only consult us later to rubber stamp their illegalities.
Now, I like the way you mentioned...
Let's follow the law.
Right.
Follow the law.
Let's go along with this law concept, because I have two issues on that. I mean, first of all, there have been numerous instances of misuse of public funds being reported in the past, and I know that some of these have come before your committee, particularly the Auditor General's report and the report, for example, on NASA, the alleged abuse there. But it seems that no concrete action has been taken against the abusers. And the second, and of course, So the question is why is this not being done? Why has no action been taken against the abusers? And also, what does the law actually state about people who violate constitutional, legal, and institutional frameworks, including best practice?
Look, the fish rose from the head. So the problem with Zimbabwe is that the culture of corruption, which has been exacerbated since November 2017, has now become so much of our culture. The calculations I've done for a paper I'm working on is that for every dollar that is collected or is supposed to be collected in the fiscus, 2/3 of it is being whisked away through corruption. And we've got 5 or 6 centers of corruption, 5 or 6 centers of corruption, what I call the commanding heights of corruption in this country. The first one is, of course, command agriculture. We've spoken about command agriculture, and we'll speak about command agriculture until the chickens come home to roost. So that's the first avenue of looting. And note that even in this appeal, command agriculture is being given $6 billion. But it's not agriculture that is sick, it's people that are sick. So give more money to health. The second commanding height of stealing is, of course, fuel. We spend about $100 million on fuel every month, but $60-70 million is being given by the Reserve Bank in the form of subsidies to these fuel people. But why would you need to give fuel subsidies to middlemen, not to you and I, the consumers, but the cartels, the Tagwireis of this world, the traffic gurus of this world are getting a $60-70 million subsidy for fuel. The third source of looting are the quasi-fiscal activities of the central bank. If you look at the Article 4 IMF report of 28 March, it speaks about policy missteps, particularly in the form of the Reserve Bank's quasi-fiscal activities, which is reflected through printing of money. Broad money supply M3 grew by a factor of 350% last year. This year, they are doing that already. So the Reserve Bank is at the core of these quasi-fiscal activities. 4 is treasury bills. So Mutuli can boast of a surplus of $4 billion, but there is no surplus because he would have issued, or Chinamasa would have issued treasury bills that are much more, twice the budget. Then you've got commodities. Our income is being lost through commodities, in particular the 4 minerals of diamonds, platinum, gold, and chrome. So we have become corrupt, and corruption has become so endemic that it is one of the preconditions of resolving our economic difficulties, alongside macroeconomic stability, alongside resolving the mess with foreign currency and currency reform, alongside the mess of our debt, alongside the mess of public sector wage bill reform, alongside the mess of gross capital formation or infrastructure. Corruption has become one of the things that any serious government must deal with if this country will move forward.
Right. Now, I want to pull it back to your own committee in Parliament, because the terms of reference of the Public Accounts Committee, which you chair, is covered, I believe, under Standing Order number 16, and I quote, "There must be a committee on public accounts for the examination of the sums granted by Parliament to meet the public expenditure and of such other accounts laid before Parliament as the committee may think fit. The committee further has unlimited oversight over all state revenues and expenditure. This power is restated in Section 299 of the Constitution." So has the committee been able to carry out its oversight role effectively to curb the misuse of public funds, corruption, and effect good practices by the executive?
You know, Andy, we have been one of the bright spots of Parliament. The work we have done around the Ministry of Finance, in the results we yielded, that first report, which highlighted 57 omissions on the Ministry of Finance, the work we have done around the Reserve Bank, the report which we produced on the Reserve Bank, the work we have done around Zinara, the work we have done around command agriculture. But there is so much work to be done, and we haven't started NASA, Net1, TED1, EcoCash. We haven't, so we've hardly scratched the surface. We've hardly scratched the surface. Right now, we've got like 16 forensic reports, including GMB, including Air Zimbabwe, that need to be looked at. So the bottom line is that you almost need, Parliament now needs a permanent full-time a public accounts committee or another equivalent body just to look at corruption, because the corruption is overwhelming. The corruption is suffocating. The corruption is drowning. We have become, with great respect to Nigeria, South Africa, and Kenya, we've become the road capital of sub-Saharan Africa, and that is not good enough.
Right. Now, my final question is in two parts, Tendai. First of all, what are the best practices in public finance management, particularly in disaster context, and are they being put into practice in Zimbabwe? And also, what other transparency and accountability avenues can be pursued prior to, for example, the annual audit coming through and then action being taken? What actions can be taken up front, things that could be happen now before money is spent? That's the first question. And of course, what are the best practices in public finance management?
So the first thing, Andy, is that there must be full disclosure. So you must be open. You must carry everyone with you. The issue, Andy, is that governance is creation of a social contract. Trust. You have worked in business. You understand what I'm talking about. So a social contract is a relationship between and an agreement between those to be governed and those that are governed. And when there's a social contract end, it creates a what scientists and philosophers call a regime of the ethical state with reciprocal obligations. So you as a taxpayer, Andy, you will pay your taxes nicely and fully when you are confident that my taxes are going to be used transparently for roads, for clinics, and for hospitals. So the biggest thing that Zimbabwe has happened is that trust is not there. That confidence is not there. The lack of trust we have in this government, according to Afrobarometer, is the highest on the continent. We don't trust the bureaucrats. We don't trust the apparatchik. We don't trust the politicians. We don't trust the head of state. We don't trust the ministers and so forth. So there's a problem where you've got a trust deficit. So the government has a lot to do in carrying people forward. But part of it can be done without resolving the political issues. And I don't want to go into there, but you know what I'm talking about. We have to resolve the elephant in the living room, which is our politics. So that's number one. Number two, Andy, you need the correct people. If you have got people who think that every policy, every structural instrument, are my children going to eat, am I going to eat, you've got a problem. So part of the problem with Zimbabwe is that there is now a culture of vested interest. There's now a culture of patronage. Everything you see being done by those in authority is for self-gain. Why, for instance, are we being forced to use Zupco when Zupco is inadequate? Is it because me and my children have got shares in Zupco? Why, for instance, are we being forced to buy masks when in every other country it is the state that is providing? Is it because me and my friends are now selling those masks and we went to South Africa and bought 4 million masks? Why, for instance, are employers being forced to carry out tests? Is it because me and my friends have stolen Jack Ma things or have gone to China and South Africa and bought the kits? So everything in Zimbabwe right now is being driven by vested interest. So we need the right men and women, professionals, Andy. We need the right men and women who know that I can't steal. If I steal, my life is gone. I'm a lawyer. I can't steal, because my primary source of living is lawyering. So I can't do that. Number three, Andy, we need the right, correct legal framework. Your constitution, is it up to scratch? Your Public Finance Management Act, is it up to scratch? Your anti-corruption laws, are they up to scratch? In my respectful opinion, they are not up to scratch, because most of our laws, if you take the Anti-Corruption Act, it became law somewhere around 2000. But now we've got cyber crimes. Now we've got modern crimes. You can steal a bank just using your mobile phone, your smartphone. So we need to update our laws. Number four, our conduct. Why don't we have asset disclosures of every public officers, from the president to the person who cleans the office at Munumutapa building? So we want to know how many farms does Emerson Mnangagwa? How many cars does he have? How many children does he have? How many bank accounts does he have? There must be disclosure. So when you take office, we must know how many cows you have, so that by the end of the day, when you see you've got 100 cows, 100 underwears, when you had 2 underwears, when you join public office, we question you. So public disclosure is very important. Number 5 is the efficacy of the criminal justice system. If you have this catch and release policy that exists in Zimbabwe, or if there's a perception of corruption around prosecutions, around a magistrate, around the criminal justice delivery system, you've got a problem. So a lot of things are wrong in Zimbabwe, which needs to be fixed. But I don't think that you can set a mosquito to cure malaria, and that is the problem which we have in Zimbabwe at the present moment.
Honourable Tendai Biti, Member of Parliament for Harare East and Chairperson of Parliament's Public Accounts Committee, thank you very much for appearing on the National Pulse.
Thank you. Goodbye. Thank you.
Now, Tendai Biti there raised some allegations and some issues that he raised, and I think one of them gets back to my question. We talked about what measures to be put in place to plug leakages. He mentioned leakages in commodities, fuel, in his opinion, foreign currency. He talked about patronage, vested interest issues, also things like laws not being up to scratch and being updated and being archaic. And also, of course, he called for asset disclosure from the executive, and I think from everybody who's in any position of power in Parliament. But these are some of the issues. But there are measures that we need to be put in place to plug leakages, because it is a lot of money by ever standard, and we've seen leakages in our past, have we not, Barbara?
Yes, we have seen a lot of leakages in our past, and if you refer to the recent publication by the Transparency International on how the Cyclone Idai funds were used, as well as the epidemic cholera outbreak in 2018, it reveals that there was a lot of corruption in terms of management of those funds and aid distribution. So as they say, history always repeats itself. There is need for us to safeguard COVID-19 resources, because if we don't do that, we'll face a financial crisis. So,
Janet,
yes.
You heard what Barbara said there about putting plugs in place to stop leakages. But I also wanted to bear that in mind in your answer. But also, you heard what obviously Honourable Biti said about best practices in public finance management. And effectively, he's saying that we just don't have any in Zimbabwe, particularly from an executive parliamentary relationship angle. Well, that's his opinion, of course.
So this is, are there any best practices that
we should follow, really?
That we should follow, they are there actually, Andy. And I think we are led by our legal frameworks, but also the institutions that we have put in place as Zimbabwe to manage risks or to mitigate risks of corruption and misuse of public funds. I think we do have the institutions. I will talk about the Parliament and the different committees that are there, including the Public Accounts Committee, the Budget Committee, and the other relevant committees that could actually come through in this regard. But the issue is on the efficiency and effectiveness of those institutions. Are they really having room for them to practice their oversight role over resources? Parliament went on a recess just after the President announced that there was going to be a lockdown. They went on a recess. Can you imagine the house is on fire and people decide to go on recess, leave the house burning? Instead of finding buckets to firefight, nothing like that has been done. So we have an institutional gap in terms of the capacity and commitment for our institutions to respond in disasters. But I think the best practice in terms of oversight, we have the Anti-Corruption Commission, but it's the catch and release maybe that Honourable Biti has spoken about. The National Prosecuting Authority, we actually have it, but does it have the capacity to really take to the end all these high-profile corruption issues that we have? If they do have, what is the political economy around them that is affecting the implementation or for us to see justice taking place? We do have the laws that I've referred to. The Constitution is very clear in terms of the oversight role of different bodies or these institutions that we are talking about. But maybe it's an issue, like Honourable Biti has said, of updating our laws so that they are versatile and they can respond to disasters and become more efficient as they become flexible. But we also need effectiveness, we also need efficiency. So it is an issue of updating our laws, of course, because disasters are actually going to be with us. Going forward, I think we have learned from Cyclone Idai, the cholera, the outbreaks, all this, and where we are going with climate change, with all this that are happening, technological changes, the fourth industrial revolution, there's a need for us to definitely look at our laws and realign, which is an issue that civil society organizations have been calling for, the realignment of the laws to our constitution, which I think is very progressive, and we all at one point agreed that it was very progressive, and we don't need to touch it as we speak. So I think we do have best practices that we could follow, just following the law. A supplementary budget or a stimulus package must come before Parliament and must be approved by Parliament.
Before it's spent.
Before it is spent. Before we go and announce it and say this is what we have, Parliament must have sat and discussed and deliberated on it. They are representing us. They play the oversight role. They are the legislative body. So these are the loopholes that we are seeing in disaster, in disaster frameworks or in disaster environments and conditions, where we suspend all these very relevant best practices that we could use. We can go to procurement. The PRAS is issued new guidelines in terms of procurement for COVID-19. But are we not opening up, many gaps for abuse and for misuse and floating of procurement guidelines?
I mean,
so
the fact is that
procurement
must still be there, and the policy should still be there, just to do it quicker and better, I suppose.
It should just, to ensure that there is that agility and flexibility, and we can move with time. But it is not for them to create grey areas and areas that can be taken advantage of by corrupt officials.
Yeah. Barbara, you heard what Janet said, and also Honorable Biti. I think one of the issues in Zimbabwe, which they both mentioned, is transparency, confidence. And I think people just have no confidence that, in essence, the money is being spent where it's supposed to go, and the public believes that public funds are being abused. I think it's a belief, whether rightly or wrongly. And I think I was back to what I said before. Why are we waiting for Auditor General's reports, for audit reports to come out, some of them 4 or 5 years ago? I mean, the Auditor General's report was looking at issues as far back as 2006, 2007. Why do we wait for that? Why can't we just put in place the right conditions up front to make sure that executives are accountable, Parliament makes sure makes the right decisions, and the money is spent where it's supposed to go?
I think we already have mechanisms to ensure transparency and accountability at both micro and macro levels of government. But the problem is with the enforcement part. Like what Janet was indicating, we can have comprehensive and detailed fiscal laws and frameworks, but as long as we do not adhere to those laws, they virtually means nothing. So the issue is not only on upgrading the fiscal frameworks and policies, but on enforcing them so that there are sanctions to prohibit extravagant expenditures and corrupt behaviors.
Unfortunately, we're going to have to take a break, and you can see this discussion is really relevant, particularly now with the government issuing a 18 billion Zimbabwe dollar stimulus package. You're watching the National Purse. Our discussion today, safeguarding COVID-19 resources. This broadcast is brought to you by Zim Papers TV Network ZTN and our partner, the Zimbabwe Coalition on Debt and Development, ZimCOD. It's time for us to take a breather. In our final segment, we'll be joined by other guests who will talk more about the subject. So please don't go away. We'll be right back. Welcome back from ZTN Studios in Harare, Zimbabwe. This is the National Purse. Our discussion today, safeguarding COVID-19 resources. This broadcast is brought to you by Zim Papers TV network, ZTN, and our partners, the Zimbabwe Coalition on Debt and Development, ZimCOD. Now, please keep your comments and views coming through or via our Facebook page, the Zim Papers TV network, and our Twitter handle at ZTN News. Now, Janet, it's become quite an interesting topic here, but I think one area which, before we move over to Joy, who's on the line now, but one topic is the role of Parliament and civil society in ensuring transparency and accountability, particularly in COVID-related public finance management matters. What is the role of Parliament and civil society?
Yeah, thank you, Andy. I think the role of Parliament never changes because it's a disaster that we're dealing with. The role of Parliament is threefold. They have to make laws, they have to play the oversight role, and they have to represent the people or their constituencies. So that role never changes, even in a disaster. What we have to find are mechanisms to ensure that those roles are implemented or are exercised actually in disaster management. We cannot take that away if we're going to ensure that we have transparency and accountability that we're talking about, and the oversight, and ensuring that the resources that we're dealing with are protected and kept. So I wouldn't want to go further in terms of that, and we know what has happened, and we are starting to get all these issues because Parliament is not playing its roles as it is supposed to be doing. So in terms of getting information that is accurate, that is regular, people are depending on informal channels, and the truthful information is not coming from the official channels. Two, the mistrust also continues then, because when there is no checks and balances, then this issue, the whole issue of citizens' mistrust of government comes into play, because there is an arm of government that is not playing its role. Civil society is within the people and is working with the people. They know the experiences, they have the lived experiences. And they also play a watchdog role at that societal level to ensure that the executive, Parliament, talk about the judiciary, everyone, access to justice issues, they are being followed even in disasters. So for me, I think this is the major role, that's the interface that is there. Let us interface society and the bodies or the duty bearers with the citizens.
I mean, I know that some civil society also, as you talked about, holding executive and holding government to account, but it also appears that if they do go out and get the right information and present it, they're almost being accused of doing the wrong thing. Do you find that civil society, however, should work hand in hand with government to make sure that on the ground things are actually happening as they're supposed to? Because sometimes central government may not know what's happening in faraway places in our country.
Yes. Civil society organizations can never try to be government. They are not. The roles and the obligations are totally different. So they play their role of complementarity in developmental issues and risk management issues, disaster management issues, and humanitarian, talk about governance issues, because they're picking from the experiences of the community. So that is the role they play. And when they are bringing the issues, there mustn't be animosity, but it should be seen as a way of the watchdog role and bringing to the fore issues that must be prioritized by government. And for me, that is the relationship that should be there. But the issue then we have is of polarization, where the government sees civil society organizations as a political formation or something like that, whereas it is not supposed to be like that. It is civil society, it is non-state actors that are interested in the vested interest, I will use that word, to ensure that societal well-being is achieved. That is the vested interest. The well-being, the livelihood, the freedoms of society is what they are looking after.
Thank you
more
for that.
Than the political.
Yeah, more the political side. Yeah. Now, joining us now on the National Purse Safeguarding COVID-19 Resources is Joy Mambenje, I think from Action Aid Zimbabwe. Joy, welcome to the National Purse. Mabenge.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Andy. I hope you can hear me clearly, and your listeners and viewers can also hear me clearly.
We can. Thank you, sir. Now, welcome here. Now, Action Aid's purpose is to help people fight for the rights that they are denied. Simple things like the right to eat, the right to stay on their land, to have an education, to have a say in the decisions that shape their lives. So what role does safeguarding resources, including COVID-19 resources, play in this?
Well, thanks, Andy. This is a very important conversation we are having at the moment. On the 4th of May, Action Aid Zimbabwe released a statement entitled Government Urged to Allocate and Utilize COVID-19 Resources in a Transparent and Accountable Manner. Now, this was not a random statement. It was a statement that we issued after realizing that a problem was in the making. Often when nations are in situations such as this, as Honorable Biti has already said, and as Janet and Barbara have already alluded to, the system is easily porous. The system, creates opportunities for corruption. It creates opportunities for looting. It is also a system that creates opportunities for rights abuses. So for us, really, as an institution, when we issued that statement, let me say this to you. We pride ourselves as an organization that unapologetically take sides with people that live in poverty. We unapologetically take sides with people that are in exclusion and people that often suffer the excesses of the state and the excesses of the market in our countries. Now, resources are scarce, Andy. Resources are scarce, and this is a pandemic of a global nature. It being a pandemic of a global nature, you can imagine this. Zimbabwe relies very much not only on its domestic resources, although there is very little or no direct budgetary support. Zimbabwe keeps speaking also primarily because there are resources that come through international agencies and organizations. Now, these resources are becoming extremely scarce because the pandemic of this nature puts a massive strain on those who ordinarily give to those who are deemed not to have much. Europe, America, and the entirety of the world is now, and going forward, going to be focusing on rebuilding their economies that have been slowed down by COVID-19, boosting their public health systems, and thus the capacity to pay for those afar is very much limited. Right. Now, it should be overemphasized, Andy, that there is need to optimally deploy public resources such as these that are coming for COVID-19. The last point on this question really is safeguarding COVID-19 resources will assist the country in minimizing the disaster that may be looming if, as a country, we do not do the right things. So we need to promote that which is for the public good, rights, resilience, and redistribute resources appropriately.
Now, Joy, one issue, of course, is whether any stimulus package actually reaches the intended beneficiaries. What would you say about that? Because there is a lot of money out there, multinational donors, and donors are coming through, and also the government is stepping up to the party, and business. Are the COVID-19 resources actually reaching the intended beneficiaries?
Well, so the desire for everybody who is concerned about COVID-19 is for the resources to reach their intended beneficiaries. Now, what we may speak about, in fact, are perhaps mechanisms or what we think might need to be done to ensure that these resources, reach the intended beneficiaries. Number one, beneficiaries must be known by category, from testing to treatment to recovery to those impacted by such actions as the lockdown, those whose livelihoods have been shut down and, in some instances, completely destroyed with no chance of easily bouncing back. So beneficiaries must be known by category and there must be transparency in that. The second one is that we do appreciate that in times of this nature, it is the responsibility of government to put out a response plan. Therefore, there is a task force, a national task force, and there are subsidiary task forces that have been put in place for dealing with this pandemic at the local level. Now, our thinking is that there must, in fact, be multi-stakeholder committees that manage the receipt, the outflow, and the accounting of these resources. This just must be seen to be apolitical and non-partisan, and they must bolster public confidence in these as delivering structures. The third point I wish to make here, Andy, is that monitoring is key. So there must be an independent monitoring team with clear monitoring mechanisms, comprised, for example, of representatives from the Auditor General's Office, your committee representatives, as well as representatives from communities and civil society itself. Now, that helps in ensuring that the resources received actually are assisted in terms of distribution and of course, in terms of accounting backwards. Now, the media, such as the media platform that we are on, plays a key a key function in accountability. So beyond being called with cameras to witness donations, we expect the same when accounting for the distribution and utilization. There is need for consultative process, but there's also need for constant updates and utilization through the media platforms. The last point, really, on your question that I wish to share with your viewers and listeners is there is often a possibility that pandemics of this nature create a huge and heavy bureaucracy. The number of people on structures created, can actually be the beneficiaries, yet they are supposed to be the ones that are assisting with the situation. So I caution here and say, for resources to reach communities, for resources to reach intended beneficiaries, we must always keep an eye on the possibility of creating heavy bureaucracies, very expensive bureaucracies that are actually focused more on allowances and many of these things, rather than ensuring that resources are channeled to the beneficiaries who must actually benefit. So let those who ordinarily would be in this line of duty be the ones to run the same, with minimal tapping from beneficiaries' earmarked resources, especially financial.
Joy Mabenje from Action Aid Zimbabwe, thank you for appearing on the National Pulse. Now, ladies, you've heard exactly what Joy said, and in fact, all of our guests, including your own selves. And I think, Barbara, your department at the university covers such issues as political and administrative studies, international relations, public administration. And we talked about best practices. And I'm sure that at the University of Zimbabwe, you teach your students best practice, particularly in public finance management. Maybe just very briefly, because unfortunately we've come to the end of the show, just sort of highlight some of the critical areas that we should look at in terms of that PFM management.
Okay, thank you, Enzi. Indeed, we have international core principles that should underpin public finance management during disaster contexts, and these include the need for clear fiscal frameworks and flexible frameworks that allows the government to act quickly and respond to the disasters. For example, we need in-year adjustment to the budget even after approval. And I should also indicate that although we can have emergency procedures, but we should also do that within the purview of the law. Then another principle that is also in existence is the issue of clear rules and institutional arrangements during disaster times with regards to public finance management. This means that we should have the budget law or any other fiscal laws specifying the responsible fiscal players that are going to be at the forefront during disasters, and also their responsible roles and activities. And we also need another principle that I should also bring your attention to is the need for financial controls or financial management. There is need to hold public officials accountable, making sure that there is a record of all their expenditures and financial transactions. And there's also need to separate financial activities from different officials to avoid corruption and fraud. And in other countries, they can even have specific departments and units that are there to receive transfer of funds from different external sources. I should also highlight another principle on procurement. There is need for stipulated procedures on how procurement can be done when we are experiencing external shocks. And ideally, the laws and the fiscal laws should stipulate the procedures of procurement. But in our case, we did not have substantive procedures. That's why the Minister of Finance had to authorize PRAS to come up with speedy measures on how we can do our procurement cost effectively and timely.
Barbara, thank you. Now, unfortunately, we're coming to the end of our show, but so I know it's going to be a complicated question for you. You can also comment as well, Janet, but citizens are concerned that any funds earmarked for COVID-19 response will, if experience is anything to go by, be abused.
Yes.
The fact is, we're in a national emergency. Every cent, every penny is required. What can the government do to give confidence that this will not happen again and that COVID-19 resources will be safeguarded?
Yes. Thank you, Andy. I think we have to address the issue of citizens' trust. there is a trust deficit. And this is the opportunity for the government to do that. Let's go back to the law. Let us involve all the arms of government during this COVID-19 disaster or crisis. Parliament must resume work and ensure that they look at the supplementary budgets, they look at the expenditures and the budgets that are being put in place, including the economic stimulus package, and whether it is prioritized, those sectors that must be prioritized. Full disclosure of information. It is one thing to give spreadsheets of donations received, but it is another to then show how those resources have been utilized. I think there is need for a government portal that is transparent, that can be accessed by all, to ensure that we can then show where the resources exactly went to. And I think Joy covered it. We must know the beneficiaries, and they must be clear. We cannot hide them. If we are bringing to the fore the donations that we are receiving, we might as well bring to the fore the beneficiaries of those resources. The issue of audit trail, I will not overemphasize that as well. We need to be reporting. We cannot wait for the Auditor General's report. Let us be reporting and reporting and reporting in terms of the utilization of resources. I think this way we can start to build citizens' trust. We can start to allay these fears of misuse of public funds, because what we have now is information that is coming from different sources on mismanagement of misuse of resources. So people are depending on official sources for truthful, credible, and timely information on the utilization of resources. And I think if the government can work on this, they have a task force, they have multi-other task forces, task forces that should be looking into this and ensuring that information is coming in through the official channels, and citizens do not have to wait for it.
I think that's a great way to end our show. Thank you very much. If we come to the end of our show, I'd like to thank our panelist, Janet Jo from ZimCod, Executive Director, Joy Mabenje from Action Aid Zimbabwe, Honourable Tendai Biti, the Chairperson of the Public Accounts Committee and Member of Parliament for Harare East, and Barbara Maiwasha, University of Zimbabwe, Department of Political and Administrative Studies. Thank you very much for appearing on the National Purse. You've been watching the National Purse, Safeguarding COVID-19 Resources, from ZTN Studios in Harare, Zimbabwe. This broadcast is brought to you by Zim Papers TV Network ZTN and our partners, the Zimbabwe Coalition on Debt and Development, ZimCod. If you have any comments or views on our show today, please contact us via our Facebook page, Zim Papers TV Network, or via our Twitter handle @ZTN News. Now, according to United Nations, anywhere between 300,000 and 3.3 million African people could lose their lives as a direct result of COVID-19, depending on the intervention measures taken to stop the spread. Africa is particularly susceptible because 56% of the urban population is concentrated in overcrowded and poorly serviced slum dwellings, and only 34% of the households have access to basic hand-washing facilities. In all, 71% of Africa's workforce is informally employed, and most of those cannot work from home. The impact on African economies could be the slowing of growth to 1.8% in the best case scenario, or contraction of over -3.5% in the worst case. This has the potential to push 27 million people into extreme poverty. Even if the spread of COVID-19 is suppressed in Africa, its economic damage will be unavoidable. Zimbabwe, and indeed Africa, must be firm and clear on good governance to safeguard African health systems, ensure proper use of emergency funds, hold African businesses from collapse, and reduce worker layoffs. Any stimulus package given by governments to its citizens must be managed transparently, prudently, economically, and effectively. More importantly, stimulus packages must reach the citizens, workers, and businesses it is intended for. In the face of COVID-19 pandemic, it is clear that we are all one. We cannot allow the abuse, misappropriation, and ill use of funds, whether from internal surplus stimulus packages or support received from international donors and multinational institutions. Such abuse will lead to possible loss of precious lives and the downfall of our economy. This cannot and should not be tolerated. I'm Andy Hodges. Goodbye, and you all be safe.